Today we're going to be taking a look at the Portkeys BM5 IIIWR, which means it's the wireless version. This is a monitor that Taylor and myself have been very excited to check out because of a couple of the new features that Portkeys have added. Now we're going to list a couple of those good features in a moment, as well as the main reason why we cannot recommend this monitor at this point in time. You're going to have to stick around for that. But before we get into it, I do want to say a big thanks to Portkeys for sending us this monitor to review, and they have been relatively helpful in the chat when we have been discussing the issues. Again, more on that in a second. This is a monitor that I've been extremely excited to check out for a while now, especially with the inclusion of the new Cine Norm OS. Right out of the box, it's a 1080p monitor with a pretty impressive 2000 nit brightness. The build quality is very good here, with the whole monitor being made mostly of metal, except for the screen that is unfortunately made out of what feels like plastic. And in terms of look and feel in the display itself, there doesn't seem to be too much difference between this monitor and the much older LH5H that I have over there. With that said though, you can always throw on a screen protector, and that's probably what I would recommend that anyone does if you do pick up this monitor. In terms of I/O, things are also looking very good here. The monitor has HDMI in and out, as well as SDI in and out. The HDMI can do up to 4K, while the SDI is limited to 1080p. And, surprisingly, the monitor does cross-convert from HDMI to SDI or from SDI to HDMI. And in the box, you do get a D-tap cable, which is always nice to see. You don't always get that. The monitor features a scroll wheel that's clickable for working through the menus, as well as 2 customizable function buttons and an on-off switch. Other than that, the monitor also has 3 threaded mounting points with anti-rotation pins. ARRI-style locating pins may not fit all the way because the holes are quite shallow, but they do work. And I think that kind of wraps up the externals of the device. And the metal housing does seem to do a good job at heat dissipation. I didn't really notice things got too loud, even shooting outdoors with it, which I did do in the sun at midday in Australia. So that's pretty good. So now let's talk a little bit about software. The monitor does feature quite a lot of assist tools, including waveforms, vector scopes, all that stuff, and one of the most robust customizable anamorphic D-squeeze options that I've seen. The monitor also supports false colors and even allows you to pick your camera's make and log profile so that you can use an EI zone style system. And it's fully customizable, which is really cool to see. Anyway, this OS is completely new for Portkeys, and having used the older Portkeys monitors, I can say it's an improvement. However, I did still find myself getting confused in quite a few places where it's not really clear what things do. And I do have to say, pinch to zoom is still a little bit weird. It just feels a little bit slow and janky, and I do think that Portkeys could do an update here to make that a little bit better to use, because it really is one of those features that I'm always using on monitors. But anyways, one of the other cool things that this monitor can do is camera control. And it can do that wirelessly if your camera is supported, as well as over LAN. My main camera at the moment is the Canon C400, and it's only compatible over LAN. So this isn't really a feature that we tested too much. Unfortunately, if you're looking for information on that, you might have to go and find a different video. I'm sorry. Now let's talk a little bit about this monitor's image quality. The reason why I've saved it for last is simply because it's a little bit harder to talk about. Taylor and I have spent several days trying to figure out exactly what's going on, and we've even spoken to Portkeys who weren't particularly helpful, but if I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, I will say it's probably hard to understand exactly what's going on. So let's get the most simple thing out of the way first. Firstly, this monitor does not support any DCI aspect ratios. It squeezes everything into 16:9, which is a problem if you're shooting with a cinema camera for cinema and you're shooting DCI, the cinema aspect ratio. However, there's another thing that's probably a little bit harder to really figure out what's going on. This monitor has poor image consistency. We found that sometimes the image is okay, other times it's contrasty and oversaturated, a lot of the times it's got a very low contrast look, and that'll be without changing any settings on the monitor. In certain situations, even if you turn this monitor saturation all the way down, you get color banding. And that's pretty weird, because you have a black and white image with colors banding. To make things stranger, if you do HDMI to SDI or SDI to HDMI cross conversion in monitor, and you put that signal out to another monitor, there are no problems. Which means from a signal chain point of view, there's probably nothing fishy going on. The monitor is working as intended. So while that might be something they can address with firmware, I do think that it possibly has more to do with the quality of the panel they're using in the screen. It looks very similar to the older, cheaper Portkeys that I have, and that was one that didn't come factory calibrated. Now, to be clear here, we put in a lot of effort. We cross-tested with several different cameras, including my Canon C400 and the Panasonic S1H, which both have HDMI and SDI. But with that said, we did want to know that our findings were somewhat repeatable, so we tested against a much more expensive color accurate and calibrated small HD 7-inch, as well as the very similarly priced Blackmagic Video Assist 5-inch 12G, which I've never felt was particularly color accurate, but it is consistent. Consistency is key. That's the most important thing. You want to know that you can trust what you're seeing on the back of your camera. And every time, no matter what settings we had on the monitor or on the cameras, we were finding inconsistencies with this new Portkeys image. I do also want to jump in here and add our latest updates from the discussion that we've had with Portkeys about these issues. Now, the team over at Portkeys have been very helpful and friendly, and they have even offered us a new firmware update to try and solve some of the problems. Unfortunately, though, we haven't really seen any improvements in any of the areas where we have had difficulties. For example, when we talked about the monitor not supporting DCI aspect ratios, they replied with, "What's DCI?" When it comes to the image consistency on this monitor, their response has been that their monitor can't be directly compared to the competitors' monitors because theirs comes factory calibrated, which is a little bit of a disappointing stance, especially because we've compared the monitor to other factory calibrated monitors and we have seen the results that we've seen. The other thing is to do with the banding. We did mention this to them, and unfortunately they haven't really had any comment about it whatsoever. I think that's most likely because there's probably nothing they can do about it, but with that said, we will leave a comment down below if things improve over time. Right now, this is not a monitor that we're looking to recommend, unfortunately. But with that said, they do have the foundations for something really cool if they do continue improving the product. Anyways, I hope that you've liked the content. If you did, consider giving us a like and a subscribe down below, and we'll see you next time.